Almost every emergency of management can be met forthwith by putting something into or taking something out of a nucleus, while nuclei themselves seldomly present emergencies. And it is so true, you know. Nucleus colonies have become the building blocks of my apiary. Last season, in 22, from October until this year in March, I lost 60% of my honey production colonies. So now you're talking about, 150 colonies I lost. And now if I'd had to go out and buy 150 packages or nucleus colonies, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be bankrupt, you know. And so the nucleus colonies, I had enough nucleus colonies to restock my bees, repopulate my dead hives, and make I smashed a 100-pound average this year. So, you know, without those nucleus colonies, I would have been up the creek, as they say. So now that's how they are and how important they are to my operation. So starting nucleus colonies. So where do you get the brood that you need to start these nucleus colonies? The standard procedure is in the springtime, when you have a good strong colony of bees, they can give you a nucleus colony, and then there continue to be a honey production colony. But if you take brood out of a colony, if you depopulate a colony in the spring, they're not going to make the same honey crop in my territory that they would if they were allowed to build up to full population in time for the honey flow. I have a very short season. You know, our first pollen comes in April. April 10 to April 20 is our first pollen. And our honey flow is done July 15 when lime trees go by. You know, so we have to have a strong colony ready to go when the first honey flows start. And splitting colonies in the springtime limits the amount of population, and population is everything. Population in a beehive is everything. For honey production, for queen rearing, for nuke making, for wintering, it's all about population. And if I reduce the population, I reduce the honey crop. I reduce possibly the wintering ability. So I can take brood from production hives. But I found a better way. And yesterday I talked about brood factories. A brood factory is a nucleus colony whose whole purpose in life, in my apiary, is to give me combs of brood. So I don't have to touch my honey production colonies. In fact, I don't ever split my honey production colonies. I try to manage them so they don't swarm, but they stay at peak population all the time. This is a colony, a double nuke box. So you see, this is the divider. And there's the nucleus colony on either side of the divider. Each has its own entrance. And they look something like this when they come out of the winter. They're different. They vary a little bit differently. Some have more honey, some have less honey. Some have more brood, some have less brood. Some have almost no brood, and those are in trouble. We take care of those, but that's sort of what they look like. I'm going to try to build them up. Brood factories get built up into multiple stories, 4, 5, sometimes 6 stories high. A four-story brood factory would have 16 combs because the cavities I use only have 4 combs. So we're adding empty combs. We're building the two-story overwintered nucleus colony into 3 stories to begin with by adding combs, by adding another box, and by adding combs within the brood nest, and so they expand upward. And they look something like this. This is really just a refresher from yesterday. So this would be the expanded nucleus colony. And you can see the reason for the different colored comb, different colored frames, is just to show how they progress. how they progress from, for instance, mixed brood, or brood in all stages, as you say. The next time around is capped brood. So it's just to show you a little bit of an idea of how the progression is. I mean, you can see that, for instance, this comb says mixed brood, brood in all stages. The next time we come around, it's emerging brood. It's gotten capped, and it's starting to emerge. And then it's emerging brood. And this is what we harvest. A lot of times what we harvest is emerging brood, especially to make queen cells, cell-building colonies. And they build up into multiple storied colonies like this. Here's one that's 5 high. And then we have one here that's 4 high. There's maybe a 3 in there someplace. And the 3s we try to build up, and we maybe give some brood to them to boost the population. And it may be the fault of the queen. We change the queen. And then we catch queens. This is catching queens. My help brings me, they find the queens in the mating nukes. This is the mating yard. These are mating nukes out in here. They find me the comb, the queen on a comb. They bring me the comb. I catch the queen. I mark the queen. I cage the queen, and I put attendants in. And I'm crazy about this, about attendants. I put 9 attendants in my queen cages. That's a lot of attendants. But I find that they live longer. I can keep them in my house for a week and use them, and they're still just as good as they were the day after they were caught, because they have so many nurse bees and they're taking care of them. And so then we have a number of queens. This is a day's catch from the mating apiary. We catch queens every 4 days. So about every 4 days, we're having that many queens. And so then once we have queens, we make nucleus colonies. So we're making nucleus colonies every 4 days, 4 and 5 days. So I don't know how many queens are there, quite a few. And some will get sold and some will get used. But now we have queens to make nucleus colonies. So we have to establish these nucleus colonies. So here's one of my help pulling combs of brood out of the brood factories. Each nucleus colony is made up in June with bees. We leave the bees on the combs when we pull the combs out of the brood factories. Each new nucleus colony gets a comb of honey, partially full. It might have capped honey on the top and around the sides, and then the rest of it be filled with open honey, nectar, whatever. Not big combs of crystallized honey. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about open nectar. And then a frame of unsealed brood in all stages, and then a frame of capped brood, and then an empty comb. Now, I've been asked, why do you put the comb of honey against the divider? Bees don't like honey against the divider of a double nuke. Why is that? Do bees in a standard national or Langstroth like a comb of honey in the middle of their brood nest? No, they don't. And what would they do with it? They would move it out, right? Well, the divider in a double nuke is the center of the brood nest for those 2 nucleus colonies. So when you put that comb of partial full of comb of honey against the divider, they move it out. But because it's the center of the brood of her brood nest, she immediately goes there and lays eggs, immediately. And there's resources there, and a lot of bees will go there. Put an empty comb there, and it's going to take them a while to polish it, to populate it. And so this is immediate. This is practically immediate, that queen, they're going to move that nectar out, and the queen is going to lay there. So that's what I'm looking for. So nucleus colonies made between June 13. So if I set up my cell builders, the first cell builders, on May 9, I'm catching the first queens on June 13. So it's a long time. It's more than a month between my first cell builders and my first queens. And the queen's made, the nucleus colonies made between June 13 and June 30. That's the sweet spot for me for making nucleus colonies. After that, the flow is going to end soon enough. So this is what it looks like when we make nucleus colonies. This is the divider in a double nuke box. And they get the partial frame of honey and the mixed brood and the capped brood and the empty comb. Well, why can't I just use 2 combs of brood, of capped brood? Because capped brood doesn't hold the bees. Doesn't hold the bees in the box. Unsealed brood holds the bees in the box. And if you don't hold those bees in the box, they're going to drift. And they're going to drift to other nucleus colonies within the apiary. You know, we might make 50 nucleus colonies and take them to one apiary, a nucleus colony apiary, not production. And any of those nucleus colonies that smell better than the others, those bees are going to drift into that nucleus colony, severely overpopulated, big beard on the outside. This really happens when we're making nucleus colonies from brood factories and somebody takes the queen by mistake. So now you have 50 nucleus colonies that are just made up, they're all queenless, and except for one, because we stole the queen by mistake, and guess what happens? Massive amounts of bees smell that queen, and they all want to go in that nucleus colony and be with that queen because they want a queen so badly. So we have to be really careful. So then we have to equalize bees, and because some of the bees will be depopulated, some of the nukes will be depopulated. So I have this little iced tea scooper thing, and you know, we scoop off the beard on the side of the nuke box. But we also have to find that queen and get rid of that queen. And that pretty much calms them all down. Nucleus colonies made after June 30th have to be handled a little differently, and I'll get to that in a minute. It's because our main flow, our summer flow, ends at the end of the lime flow, lime trees, basswood trees we call those. And after that, I like to have these nucleus colonies drawing foundation. But after the flow ends, they can't draw any more foundation. In fact, they need population, again, to draw foundation and flow. And so the colonies made in June, they build population before the end of the flow. They have enough nectar coming in to draw that foundation. But after June 30th, by the time they get built up to full strength in order to draw that foundation, they no longer have a flow. And they won't touch the foundation. So we have to handle them differently depending on when they're set up. So nucleus colonies made from this year was from July 1st, and we finished about July 10. So realize we're making 350 nucleus colonies between June 13 and July 10, July 8 this year. That's less than a month. Less than a month to make the 300 or whatever it is nucleus colonies. So again, this is what they look like if they're made after the 1st of July. Before the 1st of July, we're giving them a honey and a mixed and a capped and an empty comb. After the 1st of July, we need to boost them with more bees than we do in June. And so what I'm attempting to do is think about at what stage the nucleus colonies made in June are, and then try to imitate that population. And that takes an extra comb of brood. And so we don't use the empty comb. We put in 3 frames of brood, a frame of mixed to hold the bees and 2 frames of cap to build population quickly. So they are a little bit different. And so this is something that you have to experiment with if you're going to try making nucleus colonies this way, and find where your sweet spot is. You know, where is the best results you get? How you make them up. So then we introduce the mated queen. So we introduce the mated queens immediately. We don't wait. We make these nucleus colonies, and we put them in their apiary, and we don't wait for X days to make sure that the bees are queenless. The bees know they're queenless in 2 hours maximum. They know right away. You take a nucleus colony that was made 2 hours ago, and you put a caged queen on the top bars, and the bees just know it. You can tell they're queenless. They're nasonoughing. They're fluttering their wings. You know, they're walking around aimlessly. They know they're queenless in 2 hours, easily. So in 2 hours, we give them their, well, you know, it takes a half a day to make these nucleus colonies, or a little more, and then we give them their queens, move them to the yard, give them their queens. So some of them, it's more than 2 hours, but the most recently made one that day are 2 hours. It's plenty of time. If you wait too long, what happens? They start their own queen cells. They start emergency cells very quickly. Once they start emergency cells, they won't accept your queen because they've already started their own queens. And then you have to go through the procedure of finding all the emergency cells and cutting them out and then installing a new queen. And even then, some of them reject your queen because they've already made their decision. So you do it immediately, and you don't have any rejection. We usually make 300 to 350 nucleus colonies in this time period. And we give them queens right away. And the failure rate is about 4 or 5 queens per 300 to 350 nucleus colonies. So giving them their queen right away doesn't hurt anything. There's always going to be a little bit of loss, but 4 or 5 out of 300, 350 is nothing. So anyway, 8 to 10 days after I give them the queen, I check them again. I check them to see if the queen is laying. What comb do I go in first? I go in that honeycomb that I put in, where they removed the open honey, open nectar. Remember, that's the sweet spot. That's where the queen wants to go to lay. You pull that one out after 8 to 10 days, and you have not only eggs, but larvae and jelly. And with jelly, you don't have to see the larva because they're pretty small at that point. But you can see the puddle of jelly. And if there's a puddle of royal jelly, you know there's a larva there. And so at 10 days, that seems to be pretty much the good time to do this, where I can do it quickly. I can pull that comb out. There's the jelly and the larva, and I'm done. I pull the cage. I put the comb of the fresh larvae back in the hive. Why do I do it at 10? Why don't I do it at 6? Why don't I do it at 8? If I do it at 6 or 7, she may be laying, but I have to search. I have to search for eggs, and it takes time to search for eggs. And eventually you might find some on day 7, day 8. But when there's jelly present, it's just so much easier. So that's why I do day 8 to 10. Why don't I do day 12? Why don't I do day 14? So the longer you wait, if they rejected that queen and they have emergency cells, if you wait too long, that virgin queen will emerge. And now you have a virgin running around in your nucleus colony. First off, I don't want that virgin. I want my queen. I want my queen that's come from the breeding program. I don't want some emergency response queen in my nucleus colony. So I would say day 11 or 12 is about as far as you want to go, because if you go, say, 14, those virgins have emerged. And now it's even more work. I'm trying to limit the amount of work I have to do on each one. So when I check on day 10, when I check to see if the queen is laying, at that point I have to add a second box of 4 combs. Because it's early in the season and because I have quite a lot of flow left, that second box will have 1 empty comb and 3 foundations. Now, one little trick is, remember that comb of brood that was against the divider, that was honey, but now it's eggs and young larvae? I can elevate that into the second box against the divider and put an empty comb down below where I remove that comb against the divider and put in 3 foundations. And because they have a growing population and because they're on a flow, they start to draw that foundation out right away. So this is what it would look like. This was the original start, and it had the honeycomb here. We removed the honeycomb and we put it up here, but it's got larvae and eggs in it now. So now you have larvae and eggs in the top box, and we replace this with an empty comb, which gives them room, gives her room against the sweet spot to lay in immediately, but it also puts that empty comb next to brood. So this is the sweet spot. She jumps right in there. They've already got brood up here now, right? Because that was the comb I moved up and had larvae in it already. And now you've got larvae and brood above and next to foundation. And the best way to get your foundation drawn out is when it's in the proximity of brood, above and next to brood. They don't want that. This is a violation of bee space. And they'll jump right on it and draw it right out. So colonies made after June 30th are going to look something like this. Rather than using foundation here, I'm going to use empty comb here. Too many years we put foundation here on the later made nucleus colonies. And we go back to check later on, and the foundation hasn't been touched yet. Or maybe one side of the foundation has been drawn, or maybe 2 sides but these will be empty. So then these will be empty for the rest of the year. They're not going to touch those. Then we have to go around and remove foundation and add comb. Why? Why do it? Why not do it to begin with? So I finally figured it out, I finally got it. My old thick head. I finally got it. And so that's how we super the second box to give them expansion room. So now at this point, remember, they have this empty comb. Well, it's next to brood. She's going to lay in it. The empty combs are above brood. She's going to lay in them. They're going to put nectar here. As the flow continues, there's going to be some brood, but there's going to be a lot of nectar. And as I said before, the queen acceptance is excellent. Now remember, I raise my own queens. I just pulled them out of the mating nukes a couple days ago. They're just really fresh queens. They're not shipped anywhere. They're talking now about shipping queens in airplanes and overheating and, destroying the sperms. And mine are fresh queens. The only place they've ever been is on my living room table. So that's a very good average. So 2 to 3 weeks later, after I give the second box, especially the ones made early, made in the June time period, are going to need a third box. Of course, it depends on the flow, and it depends on colony strength, and it depends when the nucleus colony was set up. But 2 to 3 weeks later, so now we're talking about the end of July. or maybe the beginning of August. Well, we have this flow coming on soon, the goldenrod flow, and this is a major flow some years. Plus it's also hot and humid. So now you've got a colony of bees that's in a box that's too small, and it's so hot and humid that they can't cool the cavity off, and they abscond, or they swarm. Have you ever seen a colony abscond? There's a lot of talk now about colonies absconding in October and November. Doesn't happen. Does not happen in my climate. Absconding in October and November is Varroa mite. These bees are not absconding. Yeah, they're absconding one bee at a time. Bee gets sick, leaves the hive to protect her sisters, and crawls away. That's not an abscond. An abscond, I've stood there and watched nucleus colonies abscond. Most of the cluster and the queen fly away, and they're very weird. It's not like a swarm. They don't come out and land in the tree or the fence post or something. They fly away. Get the hell out of Dodge. Get as far away from this unusable, unacceptable cavity that they can't cool off. You know, the beard on the outside. They start depositing wax on the outside, and then they finally can't cool it off anymore. And they say, see ya. And what's left behind? No swarm cells, so it's not a swarm. A very small population. Well, didn't they all leave? Well, no, they didn't all leave. Most of them left. But remember, there's bees out in the field, foraging, when the abscond leaves. They come back and they go, what happened? And there's bees emerging, because remember, we're in the heat of summer. So the brood doesn't die just because 90% of the bees left. Brood is emerging. So if you were to go in there a number of days later, there would be a cluster from young bees emerging and from old bees coming back from the field after the abscond left. And there would be emergency cells. See? Emergency cells. That's how you tell a true abscond. Some of them will swarm. They will start cells. I've seen them start cells and have a one-day-old larva in the cell and gone. Do bees swarm? Normally, do they swarm when there's a queen cell with a 2-day-old larva? No. Don't they usually wait till one cell at least is sealed? Of course they do. So this is different, and it looks different, and they act differently. So 2 to 3 weeks later, 3 weeks later maybe, I add a third box to give them some more room. I add the third box in the middle, between the other 2 boxes. Now, how many times have you heard, don't ever separate brood? Separating brood is a complete no-no. Don't separate brood. Can I say, that's another one of those fallacies that goes from periodical and publication to periodical and publication and beekeeper, from beekeeper to beekeeper. Don't ever separate brood. Well, it depends on the circumstance. Would I separate brood in May when it's cold at night? No. Would I separate brood in the beginning of August when it's warm out, hot out, and there's a flow on and they're populous? Yeah, of course. No problem. So when you put that in the middle, between the 2 boxes, it creates this empty space of comb, and the bees go, what happened? You know, we're not strong anymore, even though they're the same strength. We're not strong anymore. And the queen goes, ooh, look at this. I've got 4 brood combs to lay in, right there, right now, right in the center of my cluster. And that absconding and that swarming is gone, almost entirely gone. This is what in the second super that I added 3 weeks ago, this is what it looks like 3 weeks later. Remember, it was one comb that I moved up from down below, the one that had the nectar in it and now is brood. And I moved it up into the second box. against the divider, and they had 3 frames of foundation. Well, look at this after 3 weeks. Look at how much they've drawn out. They've drawn out almost all 3 combs. And so you see what's happening here. You see what's happening here? You see this? Uh-oh. That's a queen cup. Right there. And that's an advanced queen cup. They're starting to draw it out. And if you look in that, there may be an egg in that. This is a good indication of what's happening. They're getting strong. Once they get strong enough, they will certainly swarm or abscond. So you have to manipulate this colony. This is why I have to add a 3rd box. So at this stage, I have to add that 3rd box. Do I add it on top? Why do I add it in the middle? If I add it on top and we're on honey flow, what's going to go in that box? Honey. Is that going to give the queen anywhere extra to lay? No. No, it's not. This is why I put it in the middle. Now the top box, the 3rd box, which was the 2nd box, that I elevated above an empty combs, what happens to that one? They're on a flow. The brood emerges. They put honey up there. So now you've managed the brood nest. So yes, they have a place to store their nectar. They have a place for the queen to lay in that middle box. So now you're going to have brood in the first 2 boxes, and nectar, honey in the top box, maybe with a little bit of brood against the divider, which is again the sweet spot. But you've stopped that swarming and absconding. So these are the double nukes that were given a box, 3 weeks ago. And look what's happening. Look how strong they're getting. They're bearding on the outside. Look at the beards. Those colonies aren't going to stay in that box for very long like that, with the flow coming on and hot, humid weather. They're not. So these are the ones that I have to put a box in between, a 4-comb box in between these 2 cavities, this part of the nucleus colony. And and you can see them. As soon as you do that, the beard disappears, because now they have a cluster space. And now they have the ability to cool off their cavity. It gets really difficult when they get really populous and it gets hot and there's a flow on for them to cool off their cavity. The only way they can cool off their cavity is to vacate that cavity so they have more airflow through that cavity. But putting that box in the center like that ends that issue. And we have this. So this is the colony look what's happening here. Look at the beards that's happening in here. And what's going to happen now? It's coming. This is the goldenrod flow. This is goldenrod. And Joe Pye weed. Do you have Joe Pye weed? No? Yes? So there's a huge amount of nectar. If the weather is correct, there's a huge amount of nectar. Goldenrod is a huge plant source for them in my area. I've seen them make 50 pounds of honey off goldenrod. How are you going to put 50 pounds of honey in something like that? It's not going to happen. So we have to be aware of this, and we have to prepare the bees beforehand. All of beekeeping is like that. Who was it that said, these beekeepers, they're always two weeks late for doing everything? It's true, because they're reacting. They're not acting ahead of time. They're not taking care of, they don't know what's coming, or they haven't thought about what's coming. They respond to things that are going on. They respond to, oh my gosh, there's queen cells. Well, don't you think you should have done something before there was queen cells? Don't you think you should have done something before they got like that? And before they filled everything up with goldenrod? And before they absconded? Yeah, of course. So you have to be proactive. You have to get the work done before it needs to be done. So this is what we've created. This is the original double-story nuke, two-story nuke, was this and this. And you can see what's happened. They've got the top box that has 3 frames of brood, and the bottom box has 2 frames of brood. Now you got 5 frames of brood in an 8-frame cavity. You know what's going to happen. But by putting that box of empty comb in the center, it eliminates that almost entirely. 100%, never say never. Of course, there's still going to be manipulation. You still have to look at them. And some small number might actually, again, start queen cells. Bees are different. Why do you think beekeepers, why do you think that people say that if you ask a question to 6 beekeepers, you get 27 answers? You know, why is that? Because bees, honeybee colonies are individuals, and they all act differently. Do your dogs act the same? All your dogs act the same? No, they're different. Do your kids act the same? No, they're different. Why does this daughter do this and that daughter doesn't do that? They're different. Well, the bees are different as well. So this is an apiary after we've put the middle box on. Do you have black bears here? I know you don't. You have badgers, I know. Whatever. No, we have black bears, and if a black bear gets into an apiary that's not protected with an electric fence, you won't have an apiary. It will be toast. It will be smashed to pieces. Seriously. The boxes ripped apart, the combs ripped apart, the frames broken. They eat the brood. Mostly they eat the brood. They love the brood. They really? They're not Winnie the Pooh? They don't go after the honey? More honey, please. No. Wait, okay, they eat some honey. They eat the brood. I defy you. What could you eat more easily? A pound of honey or a pound of steak? Think about it. Well, the bears are the same way. They need protein. So they eat the brood. And they destroy everything. So we have to have electric fences. And we have to maintain those electric fences. The stupid bear sometimes will dig under the fence. I have one yard that had a tree like this on the outside of the fence. The stupid bear climbed up the tree and swung down into the apiary. Now, what's that book? What's that story was written about swinging on birch trees? Who wrote that book?
That's the smart bear, not the stupid bear.
Yeah, no. Well, it's kind of stupid because now they got to get out and the tree went back up. So, who was that wrote that book about swinging on birch trees? Who's the guy, or the author? He lived in Vermont for a while. That choose which fork should I go on? The horse chose. Who was that? Robert Frost. Thank you. This was Robert Frost's thing about swinging on birch trees, on gray birch trees. Bears must have read the book. So we've got all these nucleus colonies made, 300, 350 nucleus colonies, and some of the queens aren't really good for very much. Speaking again about brood factories, some of those queens aren't really good for very much anymore. They've been maybe 2 years, and we've been forcing them to make all this brood, pulling brood out all the time. And so when a queen has been in a brood factory for 2 years, and she's still laying well, and she may still be there in the springtime, but she's going to be slowing down. And I need the most prolific queens I can have in my brood factories to crank out all that brood that I need in my apiary. You know, as I said yesterday, we're getting 11 combs of brood average per brood factory. Well, think about that. You know, those queens are using themselves up. And so we don't want a slow queen or a failing queen in the spring when we're trying to expand brood factories and make brood. So we have to do some requeening. So how do we requeen? Do we just take the old queen out and put a new one in? You could do that. You'll have some failures. The best way I've ever found to requeen a colony. Now, I'm talking about a colony that has a laying queen. I remove a laying queen, and I'm instigating them to accept a queen in a cage. Now, is a queen in a cage that's been on my living room table for a few days, is that a laying queen?
No.
It's not a laying queen. I catch every queen. I mark every queen and cage, and I evaluate every queen. At that point, they tell me what the queen is doing, what stage the eggs, the larvae are at, how much it is, how they're laying like that. But I also look at the queen, and if I see a small queen, small abdomen, small thorax, I don't want that queen. I kill that queen. What is that? The hive tool test? Do you know what the hive tool test is? The queen is there on the comb, on the frame. Smack it with the hive tool. I mean, it's like being hung by the neck until you were dead, but the rope broke. And then what, they let you go then, right? No. So, yeah, so we have to have a laying queen in the colony, in the new colony. So how do we do that? We use push-in cages. So this is a push-in cage made of 8 mesh hardware cloth that the bees can't go through. It's sort of a 5-sided box. It's got sides and a top, but the bottom is open. And it's any size you want. I mean, that's a good size. Excuse me, it's down here. That's a pretty good size. The sides of the cage are about 3/4 of an inch. What's a bee space? 3/8 of an inch. Sorry if it's not millimeters, but 3/8 of an inch. And so if you were to put the queen under that cage and push the cage into the comb, there's still going to be a bee space between the cage and the comb, which means she's not going to maybe get attacked by the bees on the outside of the cage. But as well, so you brush all the bees off the comb. You don't want any bees under the cage, and you want to find emerging brood and nectar. The best place to locate the cage is above emerging brood and a little bit of nectar. Why is that? Because those bees are emerging now. So in a number of a few hours, she's going to have a population of newly emerged bees. Those bees have never seen a queen. They want one because that's the way they are, but they've never seen one. So they immediately love that queen. Feed the queen, groom the queen, lick the queen, kiss the queen. They love the queen immediately. And the old bees on the outside, they take that clue. The queen starts to lay. Because of the attention and the feeding, there's nectar under that cage, correct? And so those newly emerged brood can take, newly emerged bees can use that nectar, feed the queen, get her plumped up again. You know, those bees that I catch the queens today, put them on my table. They're nice, big, fat ones. I caught every one of them. Big, fat abdomens. Tomorrow morning, they're skinny little things. The abdomen shrinks immediately, but it also expands immediately as soon as she starts to lay. And as soon as she starts to lay, the proper pheromones are being released. She's being loved by the bees under her cage. The bees outside the cage, they get the hint. They start to feed her from outside the cage. They love her too. They can't get at her, but they love her too. And so here she is. Here she is under the cage. At 4 days, I leave her there for 4 days. I pull the cage on the 4th day. Why do I pull the cage on the 4th day? How long does it take for an egg to hatch?
3 days.
On the 3rd day. So if I look on the 4th day and I see eggs outside the cage, what's up? There's a second queen in the hive, in the colony, that has to be dealt with. How many times have you introduced a caged queen, cork off the candy end, and you go in there to find marked queen, and you go in at a later date, and there's an unmarked queen? soon enough so they couldn't possibly have raised one. What happened? You put the marked queen in the cage, they let her go, but there was another queen, and they killed her. This way you get a second chance. You get a second chance. If there's eggs outside the cage, there's a second queen. Find that queen, get rid of her, let this go a little bit longer under the cage. No problems. So on day 4, when you pull that cage, so this is a cage that I pulled a few minutes ago. You see the retinue already? So see the plump abdomen already? I think isn't there an egg hanging out of her butt? Maybe, maybe. But they immediately love her. They immediately accept her. Why is that? Because she's now a laying queen. So what did Brother Adam do? What did Peter Little do? They introduced queens directly. They would take, Brother Adam would know a colony that needed to be requeened. He'd go to a mating nuke, catch the queen, put her in a cage, put her in his pocket, go to the colony that needs to be requeened, catch the queen, put her in this pocket, don't put her in the same pocket, and run the new queen into the colony that needs to be requeened. No cage, no candy. Why is that? Because she's a laying queen. She's acting like a laying queen. You can replace a laying queen with a laying queen, but you can't replace a laying queen with a caged queen until you get that queen laying. So that's the whole idea of the cage, of the push-in cage. Works very well. It's almost 100%. Nothing is 100%, but almost 100%. And we do everything this way. Nucleus colonies, brood factories, production hives. We go through the whole operation. We finish making our nucleus colonies about 8th or 10th of July. But we're still catching queens. So those queens, they either go for sales or whatever we need, they go for requeening colonies of bees. Production hives, brood factories, whatever. So we go through the whole operation. Do we requeen everything? No. Do we requeen every colony every year, every other year by the calendar? No. We requeen by performance, except for brood factories. Brood factories are different. We want a new queen in there, a prolific queen in there for next year. Uh-oh, what about this? You know, I started keeping bees before Varroa mites, before acarine. How many people had bees before Varroa and acarine? Well, no, you had acarine way before we did. Sure, right? Things have changed, haven't they? And this has really been a thorn in our side, been a real issue. So what do you do about Varroa mites? Nucleus colonies seem to not need to be treated as much as production colonies need to be treated to keep the infestation level down. Depending on the brood source, nucleus colonies seem to be able to stay ahead of Varroa mites. Now we found this with acarine. You know, we had acarine late. We had acarine probably in 88 or 89. That was our first experience. And it would kill half our bees in the wintertime. They'd all be dead on the ground, and you come in spring, there's no bees in the hive, it's full of honey, and there's a huge pile of dead bees out front. And it was acarine. So we started making nucleus colonies to replace the dead bees. But when I first started nucleus colonies, we wintered those nucleus colonies in double boxes on top of production hives, thinking that they'd get some extra heat. Found out later that they don't need it, but they would get extra heat from the production colony down below. And in the springtime, what happened? The production colony down below is dead from acarine. The two nucleus colonies above are alive and thriving. Doesn't make sense, does it? So what I'm thinking is that the bees were staying ahead of, by breeding, staying ahead of the acarine infestation, because acarine is an adult bee disease. There are no acarine mites in in worker brood that's capped. None in any worker brood. There's no mites in there. They don't jump on a bee until after the bee has emerged. And it's a nice young bee. And they know, they can tell nice young bees. Why would you go in an old bee? The old bee is going to be dead soon. So you go in a young bee, and they know, they can tell. So if you have your brood source for your nucleus colonies has a low mite population, you've been able to control the mite population. When you make those nucleus colonies, the bees are breeding faster than the mites are breeding. And so we found that the same thing is happening with Varroa mites. The same thing is happening with Varroa mites. The nucleus colonies are cranking out the brood so fast that the mites can't infest, really infest, really become an issue with the nucleus colonies in that first year. So they don't really need to be treated. For instance, we have running a breeding program now, and on almost every case, if you have 100 nucleus colonies, and you do mite wash or whatever it is, however you sample for Varroa mites, you're going to find a mite population in these new nucleus colonies, in July, August, below treatment threshold, way below treatment threshold, even below 2%, even below 1%. This year, out of the 100, there must have been 90 that had a mite population of 1% or less. You couldn't do that with production hives. So nucleus colonies are outbreeding the mites, both mites. So that first year, you don't necessarily need to treat. You need to sample, but you don't necessarily need to treat. And so what are you using? Miticide du jour? There's all kinds of miticides out there. Some are effective and some are not. Some are effective if you start with a low mite population, get the work done early enough to control the mite population before they get over a certain level, because once they get to a certain level, it doesn't really matter what you use for a treatment. It's already too far gone because the viruses have taken over the colony. And the viruses are what's killing the colony, not the mites. And nowadays, it takes a lot fewer mites to make a larger level of viruses. We used to see measurable depth of Varroa mites on the bottom boards when we treat. Now we treat and you hardly see anything. Very low, but we still lose them. So I'm using Amitraz from time to time. It's the only thing I can find that works consistently in my climate. But I've also adopted the use of the extender pads, the oxalic acid glycerin extender pads. I used it last year. I think it's worthwhile to pursue. I don't think it should be your standard miticide. But I think what it does is it prevents, so once you have a low population because you took care of them in the spring, low population of mites, that it slows the population growth of the mites. So they can't overwhelm the colony before you can do your treatment, whatever that may be, after the honey crop is taken. And we saw this in many colonies. They had a mite population which would have been concerning if I hadn't have done something then. But we've got supers on now. What are we going to do? We put these on, and that mite population didn't expand. Is that what you're finding? Yeah. The mite population did not expand. Now, this may only last 2 months or less. But in that time period, and are you repeating pads?
No, we go for a different mode of action.
Right, so you go for something different. But this is at least keeping the population expansion of the mites down. We're trying to get to the after honey flow, after honey harvest, before we can treat. So if we can get them with a low population to the period right after honey harvest, we can use something else. and gain control. Also, oxalic acid dribble. Very good, very efficacious when there's no brood in the hive. If there's brood in the hive, forget about it. So, we have a difficulty using this because our season ends, it gets cold, there's snow, we have to wrap the hives. You can't treat until before you wrap the hives, you have to treat. You can't do it, there's snow on the ground, it's already 20 degrees out, or more, or less, I mean. So we do use that when we can get them broodless. There's a new assay now. It's called the Unhealthy Brood Assay, UBO. Kara Wagner in North Carolina, University of North Carolina, Greensboro, has discovered that unhealthy brood gives off a volatile cocktail of chemicals. Unhealthy brood, not dead brood, unhealthy brood. High Varroa loads, high virus loads. And so you administer this spray in a 2-inch plastic circle so you can get it all within the circle, the spray. You put the comb back in the hive for 2 hours. 2 hours, only 2 hours, it's amazing. Frozen brood assay for hygienicness takes 24 hours. Look at this one. Anything over 60% uncapped in 2 hours, or 65% or something, is a candidate for a breeder, for breeding stock. Look at this one. How many has this one got? It's got almost 100% uncapped. This is the one I'm looking for. So this is in a breeder hive that's been selected through UBO and frozen brood and everything else that we do, no SEMA tests and everything else. This is a breeder hive. Actually, you wouldn't know, but her number is 090, and this one is fantastic. All the breeders were good, but this is fantastic. The next day, I grafted from this queen, and 100% of the brood had been removed, gone. So this is a really good candidate. And now we're finding that her daughters are having way low mite loads, way low. So it's a good prospect, and it shows that you are able to select in breeding for this response, which is the same response as Varroa sensitive hygiene, without having to open up hundreds of cells and look for non-reproductive females, non-reproductive foundress mites. So this is just a good indication that they're going to be high VSH. So once the autumn flow is done, this is the condition of the nucleus colonies. Remember, we added a third box back there at the beginning of August, the end of July. So now this is more like what they're looking like. Some of them have a full box of honey on top, a little bit down below. They'll have 3 or 4 combs of brood, which is what I'm looking for. 3 to 4 combs of brood in the bottom box. Same here. This one's got more honey, but they don't have enough. I want my nucleus colonies to have 1, 2 boxes of honey, and maybe a little bit down here, nectar, pollen, whatever, for winter. And so how do I know? My production hives, I weigh them. I weigh every production hive and feed to a target weight of 155 pounds for a production hive of 2 deeps and a medium super. 155 pounds, 160. But I can't weigh these because there's 2 of them. So you pick up the top box. Ooh, that one's full. Okay, good. What's the next box? That one's okay. It takes about this middle box here with 2 frames of honey and 2 combs of brood or a nectar pollen brood would take about a gallon. It takes about 2 gallons of 2-to-1 sugar syrup to fill one of these supers. So we just estimate. If this one is kind of light, it's got some honey in it, that would be a gallon. Well, if that one is light, this one's going to be very light. That's going to take 2 gallons. So this nucleus colony has to be fed 3 gallons of 2-to-1 syrup. That's how we figure it. So feeding for winter, okay, this is how we feed for winter. These are the crown boards on the nucleus colonies with a feed hole. And we put some cleats on the side, 3/8 inch, 1 bee space, and we put 2 gallons of syrup centered above the feed hole. The bees will go up there and suck it down, store it away. You do it fast. If you do it slowly, they're going to raise brood. If you do it fast, it's like a nectar flow. What are they going to do with it? They're going to store it. They'll even cap it. You feed a big colony 3, 4, 5 gallons of syrup, and you're going to see wax scales all over the bottom board, all over the entrance. They're actually drawing wax. They're actually capping the syrup once they get it ripe enough. You know, we have to put, so we can put 2 gallons and 2 gallons. Now, if it needs 3, we'll come back in a week, 10 days. They're gone. We put the other 3rd gallon on. But you have to put a shell around it to keep the weather out and to keep the robbers out. And if there's any cracks in your system here, you need to tape it with duct tape. You need to close that. It can't have any cracks, any openings anywhere like that to, so that the robber bees can get in. We had a severe robbing problem this year. I just discovered it, because we had to go back because we ran out of syrup. We went back. Well, now there's a migratory guy with 50 colonies of bees across the street, coming in and just robbing the heck out of my bees, stealing the syrup out of the cans. They didn't go in, they didn't invade the colony. The colonies are pretty good and they're tight enough, but they went up in the feeder super here and stole syrup out of the cans. Then we had to refeed them. Do you think I'm happy? Think I'd like to choke the life out of him? Anyway. So I'd like to talk about an upper entrance. I know there's been a lot of talk lately about upper entrances and ventilation and insulation. And we live in a different climate. Our bees live in a different climate than yours. Our bees make so much condensation when it's 10 below 0 Fahrenheit and 20 below 0 Fahrenheit for months. Cold for months at a time. No cleansing flights, no nothing, no flights at all. And they just drip water and it runs out the bottom, That's not good. So this is a colony on the first snow. These are brood factories actually. But this is a brood factory yard after the first snow. Now, these nucleus colonies all have bottom entrances. Each nucleus colony has a bottom entrance, but these bees are going to be buried in snow for the next 4 months. Now, they go without any cleansing flights from November sometime to April sometime, many years. You're talking 4+ months with never a cleansing flight, never a flight of any kind. And so when a cleansing flight comes along, a possibility of a cleansing flight comes along in, say, February or March, well, if there's snow burying the bottom entrance, they can't take that cleansing flight. They're stuck in the hive. We do try to select bees that are quiet, tight clusters. I like those because they get less indigestibles. They're less active. They don't have as much poop in their guts. So what do? We put an upper entrance in. And where do we put that? So you see that some of these have an upper auger hole. An upper auger hole there, an upper auger hole there, an upper auger hole there. As I face the nuke box, it's always on the right side. Remember I said that yesterday. That's the correct side, right? The right side. And so I leave that open for winter. I take the duct tape off and I leave it open for winter. So even if the colony is buried, the hive is buried this deep in snow, if a cleansing flight shows itself, they can still take that cleansing flight. And it's only a little 3/4 inch hole. But they love that hole. Oh my God, they love that hole. So I have to close that hole once spring comes, because they'll use that hole all summer long. They love it. They don't like the bottom entrance as much. But the problem with having an auger hole in the top of the hive is the bees want to locate their brood near an entrance. And so you'll have brood higher in the hive, and down below will be empty comb and pollen. And so I'm trying to avoid that. My production hives also have an upper entrance. But that is a notch in the inner cover, in the crown board. So when we turn the crown board down with the notch down, that becomes their upper entrance. But it also relieves moisture. So on a really cold morning, I can go out and look at my home apiary, and there will certainly be frost in the upper entrance. But sometimes, some of them have so much moisture coming out, there will be a horizontal icicle, a horizontal stalactite coming out of the upper entrance. Do you think that's a good thing? Is that a good thing? I don't think it's a good thing. So there's two reasons why we have upper entrances. Necessary in my climate. Maybe not necessary in yours, but necessary in mine. Wrapping. So I could leave my hives unwrapped. I like to wrap. I like to wrap with black paper. See, this is tar paper. Why? No, it's not for insulation. No, it's for solar gain. So those cold winter days, those really cold winter days, guess what? The sun is usually out, right? You get cold, you get clear skies, you get colder weather. So that warms up that hive, the interior, just enough so the bees may be able to go out and bring in some stores back into the brood nest from the honey that's out here on their edges. That's all that's for. And then you have to leave the upper entrance open. So we make a hole, we staple it on. You don't need battens and all that. You just need staples. And on top of the crown board is a piece of 2-inch styrofoam, or building foam, or rigid foam, or whatever you call it. That insulates that crown board. So all that moisture that's rising off the cluster from respiration hits that cold crown board, condenses, and drips on the bees. Wet bees or dead bees in my climate, guaranteed. So this prevents the dripping. It allows the moisture to go out the upper entrance as vapor. It never condenses on the crown board. Yeah, it condenses on the sides to some degree, but that's not going to drip on the bees. And yes, he's right. They do need some moisture in the wintertime. They do need to rehydrate themselves. There's plenty, in my climate, there's plenty of moisture for that. We tie the cover down so it doesn't blow off in the winter. Cover is sitting on foam. There's no propolis to stick it down. So we tie the covers down. That colony can fall over. The cover will not come off. I've had colonies fall over in the wintertime. The cover stayed on. The bottom is exposed. They start flying out the bottom if there's a cleansing flight. But they don't die. If the cover comes off, they're done. Wet, snow, done. This is the upper entrance hole. Look at that. They're already peeking out. You know, what are you doing? What are you doing? They're already doing that. So they immediately like that upper entrance. And so here's an apiary that's all wrapped up for winter. It's an apiary of 3-story nucleus colonies, all wrapped for winter, ready to go.
You said you put your feeders on a bee space. Why do you do that? Don't you not get rubbing things going underneath and nicking it?
No, because everything is sealed, okay? So the only accesses they have is through that feed hole. Now, okay, so now we have 2 nucleus colonies, and they each have a feed hole, and they each have syrup. Wouldn't you think that these bees will go over and say, I'm going to take those bees' honey, syrup, and vice versa? They don't. They don't seem to cross over. They pretty much stay specific to those cans of syrup. So they don't really, no, they don't cross over.